Welcome to Sacrilegious Discourse.
For this is what the Sovereign Lord says.
Why do you need prophets to tell people who you are and what you want?
If you can justify everything that the God of the Bible has done, then you can justify any of your behavior.
A lot of this mentality is trickling into what is now mainstream right-wing Christianity.
I am capable of empathy greater than this God of the Bible.
This is a Bible that they tell kids. This is the good Lord. This is the good book. He is fantasizing about murder, mass murder.
Head over to sacrilegiousdiscourse.com right now to find out how to leave us a review or support us on Patreon.
Hey there, sinners and saints. It's your favorite Bible-bashing duo from Sacrilegious Discourse, and we need your help.
That's right, folks. We're raising funds for some heavenly equipment and a studio that doesn't sound like it's in the depths of hell.
Our current setup, let's just say it's more apocalypse than audiophile.
So if you want to hear us dissect the Bible without the background noise of demonic squirrels, chip in a few bucks.
We're aiming for $5,000 to upgrade our audio and build a studio worthy of blasphemous banter.
Donate today and help us spread the good word of atheism.
You can find a link right on our homepage, sacrilegiousdiscourse.com. Every dollar counts.
Even if it's from your collection plate. Husband.
Wife?
Have you ever heard of OK Atheists?
Yes, and they are doing some really important work. Our friend Zaylen leads interesting discussions with thought leaders in the atheist community.
We really appreciate their contribution to the secular community and think what they are doing is absolutely amazing. So today we have a fantastic treat for our listeners.
In an effort to support their project and boost their platform, we are opening up our podcast to OK Atheists for Zaylen's interview with Tim Sledge.
If you enjoy this podcast and want to experience more of the critical input that OK Atheist lends to a free-thinking society, please hit the show notes to learn how you can join their Discord or view more of their episodes on YouTube.
So tonight is going to be a wonderful chat with Tim Sledge, who is also on Twitter, and that is where I first saw his account. I did not realize that we actually live quite close to one another. We're in the same area, which was actually pretty cool. And we're actually within the same humanist circles, so that was really cool as well. So I reached out to him and asked him if perhaps he'd be willing to share his journey with us. He started as a pastor in the Houston area and then is now a secular humanist. A lot of his viewpoints have been penned in several books, and we will share some of those tonight. We'll kind of talk about those a little bit if you're looking for something new to read. And I'll put the links up in the chat area. So again, if you're just joining, you can chat with us while we're talking. And we'll do a Q&A in a little while, or you can always raise your hand and we'll try to bring you up. We're not going to be like super formal tonight. So yeah, without further ado, Tim, welcome tonight. And why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about your story?
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I'm honored and delighted to be sharing with you guys tonight. Pardon my voice. I've got allergies and I'm a little bit hoarse. But so I was born in Austin, Texas. And we moved around a lot. My dad was a binge alcoholic. He was a great guy. I mean, when he was sober, he was incredible. And I learned a lot of good things from my dad. But every once in a while, maybe it would be a month or 2 months or more, he'd sort of disappear for days or maybe a week or two sometimes. So that created kind of an interesting environment for me and for my sister later. The other part of that was my dad was from a very religious family. He had 6 sisters. He was the youngest. So you can imagine having 6 older sisters who really thought you were great. And he was a great guy. But they were all very religious. And so when I went to see my grandmother, we'd get in the car to leave after a day or two. And she'd gather us all around before we got in the car and lead us in prayer. My dad, though, obviously there were some contradictions in what was happening in his life, he was also deeply committed to the idea of Jesus and faith. So in this context, we ended up in Snyder, Texas, a West Texas town. And I got my Sunday school class when I was 8 years old, gave me a Bible. They gave everybody a Bible. And I noticed in the back it said, there was a chart and it said how to read the Bible in 1 year. And it had readings for every day for a whole year. And so I decided I was going to do that. The next summer, when I was 9, we had Vacation Bible School. And if any of you have been to a Baptist Vacation Bible School for kids, usually it's on Thursday. You've had fun, crafts, games, Bible stories. But then the pastor comes in. Well, he told me the same thing my Sunday school teacher, Mr. Reed, told us just about every Sunday morning. Mr. Reed would say, you need to give your life to Jesus. And he'd tell, if you don't give your life to Jesus, you're going to hell. And I mean, he didn't make it super scary. I mean, there was stuff about, just doing the right thing, loving God. And so during that Vacation Bible School, I walked to the front, I prayed, I invited Jesus into my life. I was baptized, fully immersed in water the next Sunday night.
So when you were, sorry for
No,
butting in here a little bit, but when you said the minister was talking to you a little bit about hell, that wasn't scary to you as a kid? Like, or was he just saying it very nicely?
Well, he wasn't. That's interesting, and it's kind of hard to, and it's part of the, looking back at it now, it's part of the craziness of all of this. But I don't remember him shouting, and I like Mr. Reed. I mean, another interesting thing, this is just a little Baptist church in West Texas, and right before Sunday school, he'd grab his last cigarette and come in and teach us, and then catch another few puffs with my dad and the deacons outside of the church, and then they'd all come back in. And that was not supposed to be okay, but I mean, it's just the way it was. This was like in the 50s. And so I mean, I think this is part of the indoctrination, that you get to a place where you feel, well, this is normal. These people they're just trying to, it's just like my school teachers. They're just trying to tell me how to be a good boy, how to do the right thing. And then, of course, in church, we'd sing songs like, are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? And are your garments spotless? Are you white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?
Oh, I remember so many of those those songs. I went to Catholic school, but yours sounds actually a little bit nicer, even though the songs are really creepy. But but for my experiences, though, I had a nun who was like super mean. I mean, she would like not whip us, but like slap us with the ruler, and I had to sit up straight and pray with the arms at a certain degree angle. I mean, everything had to be perfect. But
wow. So anyway, we moved to Odessa, Texas. And if you don't know about Odessa, Texas, that's the home of the Friday Night Lights football team, Permian High School. And that's where I went to high school. When I was 16, I felt that God was calling me to preach. And I walked the aisle again, and I told the congregation. The pastor there was like a second father to me. But by this time, my dad had not totally stopped his problem drinking, but it was almost stopped. And he was going to church now. So I started preaching when I was 16, and by my senior year, I was preaching in some little church or not so little church in West Texas almost every Sunday. I was elected student body president at Permian, and in my speech, I said, "Look, I'm a Christian, and so I'm not sure what I did to lead, but I'm going to lead like a Christian." And my only contribution to the first Friday Night Lights state championship was most of the home games I said the prayer. So I'd like to take credit for their wins. Not really. But my life, and Southern Baptist dominated West Texas as a teenage preacher was wow. I mean, it was awesome. I had one friend, and his mother in high school, he would say, "Can I go? Do you mind if I go somewhere with so and so?" And she'd just grill him, like, "Well, where are you gonna go? What time do you?" But if he said, "I'm going with Tim," she didn't ask any questions. Speeding this up, I got married. We went to Wheaton College, and just outside of Chicago, which is Billy Graham's alma mater, and we ended up sharing a house with Philip Yancey and his wife Janet. Billy Graham said Philip, this was much later, was his favorite Christian writer.
Hmm.
And
But at some point, like everything sounds like, just pretty mellow for you and like, not too much drama. I mean, aside from that, your father was drinking a lot. What was that going through that experience? Did you go through a lot of abuse, or was it more of just him just always gone all the time?
well, a binge alcoholic is quite a bit different than like a daily or weekend alcoholic.
Mm.
So life could be really great for months, and then he would mainly just disappear. um,
Wow.
but and my mother, after my dad died, one of the stories I would tell, even in some of my sermons, was how back then you could get your driver's license in Texas when you were 14. And I would tell the story that the summer that I got my driver's license, my dad, he liked to be with me so much that he had me chauffeur him around. He ran a fence company. He was the manager of it, and he would have me chauffeur him around all summer. Well, after he died, that summer we'd had all that time together. Well, after he died, I found out that the reason I was driving him around that summer was that he'd had a DWI and he didn't have a driver's license right at the time.
Wow.
And so it was more, in AA and 12 steps, they talk about the elephant in the living room. So it was more about secrets. And he was like a lot of alcoholics. He was he was just a great person. And there may be some people who know more about this than I do listening, but one theory is that alcoholics are more sensitive than most people, and drinking is sometimes tied to there's just too much to take in, too much to handle. I don't know, but it's really, I mean, it was hard in terms of just kind of waiting for the other shoe to fall. I think that's the main way it affected me, and that's common for adult children of alcoholics. It's like, okay, when is the shoe going to fall? Things are really great. When's something bad going to happen?
Yeah. Just to segue a little bit, in one of the books that I had perused through, Goodbye Jesus, in that one, you actually open up with a little bit about talking about your father and your childhood experiences. And
Yes.
then
Mhm.
I recall that you brought up some of the moments that started to first make you wonder about your role as a pastor and to start making these, I guess, forming questions that started leading to you eventually leaving the ministry. So, do you mind chatting a little bit about that,
Not at
or am
all.
I jumping the
No,
gun?
no, no.
Okay.
So, well, I went to seminary, got a master's degree and a doctor of ministry degree. And while I was in seminary, I was a youth minister in Memphis, Tennessee. I would live there in the summer, and then they would fly me to Memphis from Fort Worth, Texas, every other weekend. And one of the things that happened there, this was in Memphis about 2 years after Martin Luther King was assassinated there at the Lorraine Hotel. And to me, and one of the things that Christianity, I don't know if it was Christianity or just genetic, but I know that some of it was my seminary training in ethics. The idea that color doesn't matter, everybody's the same in terms of value, and discriminating against people is really wrong. So I went to Memphis, and we started this ministry called Dial-A Team. And what it was, on the weekend, I trained some, my degrees in seminary were in pastoral care and counseling. And so I trained some people, some teenagers, to answer the phones and just let other teenagers all across Memphis call in and just talk about their problems. And the TV stations gave us free advertising, radio stations did the same. And so we had a lot of people calling us. And Memphis, Tennessee, back then, was about 50% African American. So we had African American youths who called in, and we would invite them to our youth group meetings. We had a swimming party at one of the teenagers' home, and some African American kids came to the swimming party. And in the middle of the party, they posed the parents who owned the house where we were having the party said, "You've got a phone call." So I picked up the phone, and it's the father of one of the girls from our church. And he was really angry. And he said, "I understand you've got some," and he used the N-word, "over there." And I said, "No, I don't." And I repeated, I said, "I know I don't have any of those over here, but there's some black kids over here." I was just, very calm about it. So he came over and got his daughters and took them home. And then around that same time, our pastor was he was more liberal in Southern Baptist life. And he had been very vocal about positive race relations, but the newspaper, I think there were two newspapers in Memphis then, and one of the two newspapers found out that our preschool did not accept African American children. And so one Saturday morning, they wrote like a full page, it was a huge article, and just, rightly so, calling out the hypocrisy. And the pastor was convenient. I mean, it was just accidental, but he was at a Baptist conference in New Mexico when that happened. And the newspaper article said that the NAACP was going to picket our church the next day on Sunday. So an emergency deacons meeting was called, and our Christian Life Commission in the Southern Baptist of Texas had some little pamphlets and they had one on race. And I had some of those because we used them in our dialysis ministry, and so I got a handful of them. And I'm going to the deacons meeting because I'm thinking, well, this would be a good thing that I can speak up and highlight, just to remind everybody what the Bible says about this. But when I got there, oh my gosh, I heard one older deacon, there was a fear they were going to come in the church. And he said kind of under his breath, "If they come in, I'm going to kill them." And it was pretty clear, pretty fast. Nobody was asking for any Bible verses to be read that day.
Mm-hmm.
The younger.
What was your reaction at hearing all of that at the time? Did you just kind of go with it, or
no?
just...
I was like stunned, like, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in the book Goodbye Jesus, I talk about what I call exceptions to the rule of faith, and this started happening, before I was out of seminary, as with these events. But one of the things that I learned, and I think most people do learn in church, is that doubt or hard questions posed about faith or about God, that's not good. It's dealing with doubt is like dealing with the pain of a long distance runner running a marathon. You deal with it, and it's a temptation to give up. And all my life I've been taught, don't give up, don't be a quitter, and so that's what you did. So with these experiences, I look back now on many of them, and I think, well, that alone might have been a good reason to at least really step back and take a hard look at everything. But coming out of this training, this indoctrination, it's like, no, that of course you're having doubts, but just remember Jesus is Lord, and all these positive things. So what I would do, I just it wasn't conscious so much, but I just say, when I get more education, more experience, I'll be able to figure this out. So I just stuff it away for a while.
I'm going to invite Brian up here. It's a question. Go ahead, Brian. Welcome.
You talk about defending doubts. Defending yourself from, doubting and don't give up.
Yeah.
I've read so much of the Bible, the really not so kind parts, the nasty parts, the graphic parts. I don't see how anybody. How did you deal with the really hard stuff? Say like the story about the Saul asking David for 100 Philistine foreskins and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
How things like that. And there's a lot of graphic stuff in there. How did you? At what point was it anything like that made you finally go, this is nonsense? Or how did you deal with those really difficult passages?
Okay, good question. So, as you can imagine, reading the Bible when I was 8 and 9 years old, I remember thinking, of what does begat? And this is a King James version. So and so begat, so and so begat. What is begat? And so I encountered those stories, but I was so young. I want to read this, and I want to be able to say I read the whole Bible. So I don't know that I really was even old enough to, I don't know, it just didn't register with me. If it did, it didn't stay very long. But if you think about a magician, and this is an oversimplification, but what a magician does, how they trick us, is they say, don't look here, look there. And that's what preachers do. And I don't think I know in my own case later, it wasn't like, oh, how can I trick these people? No, I'm as much in the thing as they are. Your pastor, when you're growing up, that's where you're getting your focus of what the Bible is and what it says. And he's probably not preaching on those passages. And then when I became a preacher myself, who wants to hear a sermon on how God said to kill every living thing? That's not very inspirational. So you're looking for passages that, forgive, love your neighbor as yourself, trust God, don't worry about the future, just trust God. I know this may seem hard to believe. Well, I'll give you another example. When I was in college, the first class I had on the Bible was an Old Testament survey. And one day, my teacher said, now some people say the God of the Old Testament is different than the God of the New Testament. The God of the Old Testament is mean, and the God of the New Testament is loving, but it's the same God. God is the same. And I'm sitting there and I say,
If you don't mind, you bring up a good point there, because I've often looked at this God character, a lot like a bratty little kid playing his Xbox and gets frustrated with it when he can't get to the next level.
yeah.
Adam and Eve. Well, the garden was supposed to work. Nope, kills them off. Then the second part, be a good Hebrew and nobody gets hurt. Flood. Then he clones himself and kills himself and sacrifices himself for something that he didn't have to do. And then at the end of the book, what does he do? He goes right back. You got the Jesus in the middle, right? It's like an abusive spouse, okay? He beats you, and then he says, I'm not going to beat you anymore. Here's some flowers, i.e. Jesus. And then what does he do at the end of the book? He goes right back to beating the crap out of and burning everybody to death that didn't kiss his ass.
Yeah.
It's like that bratty little kid with the Xbox who gets frustrated that somebody else is beating him and picks it up and smashes it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dan Barker wrote a book. Let's see if I can get the title right. God, the worst character. The Old Testament God is the worst character in all of literature. And he just outlines all these things. There's not a week goes by now that I don't just in my head just say to myself, Tim, how did you ignore all that? How did you believe what you did? And I hope to explain some of that as we talk tonight, but
yeah, Tim, one of the books you have, would this address some of that? You have a book entitled Making Peace with Your Past. I don't know if you're just addressing other people in general, but do you also relate to it as yourself, like you're, now where you are now in your life versus where you were?
Well, that book was written in 1992 when I was a pastor in Houston. And I'll just say quickly a little bit about that book because it's a big part of my whole story. I pastored churches, and my first full-time church was in a suburb of New York City. And my second one was outside of Phoenix, Arizona. And then I came to Houston, to a suburb of Houston. And that's where I kind of hit my stride. And the church I was pastor of there quadrupled in size while I was there, reached 2,000 members. And so I had a cousin, and alcoholism is all through my dad's side of the family. And I had a cousin, when I lived in Arizona, he was at the Meadows, which is one of the top treatment centers in the country. And I went to see him. We've been close as kids. I hadn't seen him in years. And we reconnected. And so over the next few years, he would talk to me about AA and 12 steps. And he told me that the Meadows had a program for ministers where you could go there free for a week because they wanted ministers to learn what they did and then refer people to their treatment facility. So I went, and oh my gosh, I was put in a group of patients. We did about, I think, 5 hours of group work a day. And in the first group meeting, first person, I'm an alcoholic, and they delineate how far into that they were. Then, I'm a heroin addict, I'm a sex addict. And I'm like, what am I doing here? I wanted to run, but I didn't. But as the week progressed, my attitude shifted, and I was saying, I'm a lot like these people in terms of how my emotions work. And I had a life-changing experience there. I went back to my church and I preached a series of sermons, 12 sermons on adult children of dysfunctional families. I got real honest. I talked about I'd been having panic attacks in the months prior to that. I'd never made myself so vulnerable. And after the first sermon, I said, we're going to do some support groups to help with these issues. They'll meet each week during the 12 or 13 weeks of the sermons. If you'd like to come, show up on, I don't know, Tuesday night, whenever it was. I was hoping to have 6 people at least. We had 60 people. We did 6 groups. I had staff and a counselor who helped with some of them. I did 3. And it just took off, and we did that for several years. And I developed a workbook that people used during the groups, and that became the book, Making Peace with Your Past. The Southern Baptist Convention picked it up. I was speaking all over the country, talking about support group. And later, I translated in South Korea. I went and spoke in South Korea for 10 days, and then to Peru. And an interesting thing that was happening. Now, the group, but really the core of it, you read the scripture and you pray, but that's not what makes it work. What makes it work is that you set the stage in a small group of 6 to 8 people, and you model for them being open, authentic, vulnerable, and safe. And you teach them how to give feedback to each other. And then you just, after about the second or third week, you just sort of turn them loose. It was so powerful what I saw happen in those groups. And after,
and I know you were doing this when you were in religion, but I'm sure now some of those methods still apply, but yet now you can apply those techniques, without the religious aspect to it, so you can,
yeah,
in essence, help more people.
yeah. And if I could just say one more thing, and then just one last thought. It's really important. So what started happening is I was leading these groups, and as I was traveling, and I'd lead groups in other cities while I was doing like training. This thought crept into my head. This works better than praying to Jesus. And I'd say this is true of most ministers I knew. You want to help people. That's why you're doing it, believe it or not. For most people I knew, that's why I was doing it. I wanted to make the world a better place. And it's like suddenly I almost accidentally found this thing, because what I was seeing over the years was all these exceptions to the rule. In my first church, a guy, dramatic conversion, he's near New York City. He sort of comes out of nowhere. He's in a crisis. He gives his life to Jesus, and a month or two later, he robs a bank. And I had so many experiences like that. Wait, this isn't the way it's supposed to work. So this whole thing of the making peace with your past, the realization that the core of it is not the prayer, not the verses that are in the book. It's people helping people. And that, I would say, had I not ever gone to the meta, it's hard to say, but I think more than anything else, that very slowly led to an erosion of it made me able to say what I was really saying.
No, I love that.
You made a great point about people helping people. I drank for 40 years, damn near killed me. I stopped drinking. It's almost been 2 years now that I've been sober. Did it without a Bible, did it without Jesus.
Yeah.
But it did require help. I was in the hospital for, almost a month. And they wanted to send me home immediately. And my house was in no condition for me to come back. And I stubbornly stayed there because I knew if I went home, I was going to start drinking again. And so my friends, while I was in the hospital, they fixed my house up and made it clean again. And the other thing is, and I'm telling you, there's really only one way to do it, but you need a lot of help. You need to put yourself in a literal prison. Luckily for me, I'm retired and I don't drive. And when I got out of the hospital, any place that I had to go, I had to take a taxi because I could not walk to the store or anything. And that's really but it still takes help. And I'm not going to ever say that I won't falter, but I think it can stick better when you're not attaching it to false hope and you're actually attaching it to, my reality was my alcohol or my liver. That's what it came down to.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, Brian, I think you've illustrated something that I believe, and that is that you did it with the help of your friends. And you can correct, I don't want to put words in your mouth that you don't agree with, but what I'm hearing is you did it. You took responsibility. You stopped drinking.
I don't think it's as much as responsibility as fear. Okay, fear of dying, and fear of hell.
Right.
I just mean fear of pain,
I hear
and
you. Yeah.
fear that I won't have any friends. Those were the two biggest things.
Oh, I appreciate that. And what I'm saying though is, you're not saying God did it. You're not saying that it was a miracle. And so I think that a lot of things work, but not for the reasons they say they work. And I think that, and I have mixed feelings about AA because I've known some people who were really helped by it. And I don't want to, and frankly, if someone comes to me and they're struggling with alcohol or drug addiction, that may be where I send them for lack of a better place. But the idea that you are never healed, you always need the organization. I think your testimonial is important because it's one example of somebody taking responsibility, and whether you were motivated by fear or fear of health issues or fear of loss of friends, you took responsibility for your life. And to me, that's a humanistic value, and it's a realistic and true value. And I in our groups we said, I support you. And so, Brian, I say I support you.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for sharing that. I wanted to cover a couple more of your books as well. One of my favorite books that I read from you was How to Live a Meaningful Life. Truly my favorite. And I think the reason, and for those of you that haven't read any of Tim's books, I highly suggest picking up one. You can read them at leisure. They're highly digestible, and they have such a secular message. It can help those who are actually still have faith, but it can actually still reach out to the secular community because they're very non-judgmental books, which is an approach that I really appreciate because it's a refreshing take away from hearing, that always an angry atheist point of view. So I really do appreciate these books. Tim, would you mind telling us a little bit about that one?
Now, so I stopped being a Christian, and I didn't write in my calendar. It was either 2007 or 2008. I know the event. I had lunch with a friend from high school who was an atheist, and I apologized to him for trying to witness to him all those years. So after that, and so what was the one thing? Well, it was finally having to admit that knowing Jesus does not supernaturally change people. And I just witnessed that for far too long in too many places. And so a lot of great people in church, a lot of good things, great things happen, community support, therefore you when you're sick or when someone dies. But I just had to admit that these are people, some are great, some are actually awful. Being a pastor can be very stressful because some of the very difficult people you're dealing with. And a lot of them are just in the middle of the road. They're good people. They're human. We're all human. So that was what caused the break. And I did it sort of backwards because at that point, right at that point, if you'd have said, well, who do you think Jesus was then? I would have said, well, I don't think he was God, but beyond that, you'll have to get back to me. So it took me a while to think about that. But the thing I did think about real quickly was, okay, what are my values? And so I thought about what in the book, How to Live a Meaningful Life. The subtitle is Focusing on Things That Matter. So I thought about what matters to me. And in the book, I summarize at the end under a heading of mantra, seeking truth matters. Look deeper, be willing to change your mind, and follow the truth wherever it leads. Self-awareness matters. Never stop learning who you are, even when doing so is challenging or painful. Values matter. Build personal character on core values that work for everyone. I talk about strength. I say visualize your inner core of strength and practice strength training to build integrity, self-reliance, determination, and resilience. Kindness. Keep building your kindness quotient as you practice respect, empathy, patience, and forgiveness, while remembering that kindness works best in partnership with confident inner strength. And I would, so this Zaylen, this is a good point to, I think, that I'd like to just say a little bit about what is my strategy in interacting as an atheist with the world, an ex-Christian, ex-minister atheist. I said there were a lot of great things about my dad. He was a salesman, and many times at night at the dinner table, he would tell sales stories. Like when he sold cars and real estate, he was always changing, but he could sell anything. There was a joke that one of his friends said if they saw my dad coming to the door, they wouldn't answer it because they knew that whatever he was selling, they would buy it, and they might be sorry they did. So he'd tell these sales stories, and I learned about the art of selling at the dinner table. And one of the things that I learned, and this is not about high pressure manipulative stuff, you don't sell somebody on a product or an idea if you walk up to them and you say, you know what, you're an idiot. And that stuff you believe, that's insanity. Psychologically, all that does is it makes the person double down on their resistance.
And we see that a lot, for example, in social media, where we'll see folks going at each other, whether they're religious or non-religious, and they just get into a big spout on Twitter. And what happens is each person just buckles down even harder in their own direction and solves nothing.
Yeah, and so for me, I don't know, I certainly don't think I have the ability to convince a Christian who is all in, things are going well, they feel good about where they are. Then, my comment to those people often is, well, good for you. I'm glad that's working for you. I wish you the best. And I frequently add, I really mean this. I would help you defend your right to believe as you do, because I think it's important that everybody be free to decide. What I'm really focused on, who I'm really focused on, is people who are already struggling and they're kind of in the early stages of questioning, or they're farther along, or maybe they've just left. And one of the roles I see is helping people know that they're not alone, they're not crazy. And I think that it's important, excuse me, that we acknowledge that the thing that's wrong with churches, in my view, is that what they believe is not true. And there are a lot of problems with a lot of churches, but there are a lot of good ministers and a lot of good people in churches. I think it's important for us in the secular, non-believing community to acknowledge the sociological contribution that churches make. They provide community, they provide help when there's a crisis in your family, sometimes better than others, and they do it better if you're real active or a leader than they do if you're kind of on the fringes. So I just think it's important that we are aware, and if we don't understand that about a committed Christian, I don't know how we'll ever help them, because they just think we're stupid if we start saying, well, your religion is insane. I mean,
Right. But it's also important to remember or to keep in mind that, many of us that are atheists, it's not really that once we have gone through like a deconversion, it's not our job or our mission to convert anyone else or deconvert anyone else, because atheism isn't a religion. It's not a club or what have you. So, it's really just more of, well, this is what I declare to be.
yeah, I agree. For me, because I spent all those years at the end of the church I pastored was one of the top 100 churches in the United States in Southern Baptist life in baptisms. I convinced a lot of people not only to become Christians, but to be more committed. And so now I'm kind of like somebody who drove a little bit farther down the road and there's a bridge out, and I came back to several miles back, and I parked my car in the road and turned on my blinkers, and I'm saying, stop, the bridge is out. Don't, please just listen. That may be too dramatic, but I just feel like, because I know for me in my early years of belief, when I would face those difficult questions, I'd say, well, I just need to get more training, more education, more experience. But after decades of ministry and a doctoral level theological education, so those issues were still there. And so I just want to be one person who's available for people if they are open enough to ask questions, to be able to maybe save them a lot of wasted years of pursuing something that it's kind of like, the Wizard of Oz. You're going to see the wizard and you get there.
Yeah.
And there's a guy behind the
Absolutely.
curtain.
Yes, and I really do recommend these books for everyone just to, pick up and take a look at. They're just really wonderful. I know that How to Live a Meaningful Life, it just really hit me. I related to it very well. So, I just really love that one a lot. One of the other ones that I wanted to touch briefly on before we go was the Four Disturbing Questions book that you had written. And if you wouldn't mind chatting a little bit about that one.
So in Four Disturbing Questions, my thing is I like to try to make complicated things simple. And I watch on YouTube. I'm a big fan of Pelagia and Myth Vision. The guy's now, his name is Derek, and Bart Ehrman. When you listen to these scholars debating, it's extremely complicated. Even, with all the training I have, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so. And so one of the things I want to do is, how can we simplify the basic questions? And so the first question in the book, the first of the four simple questions with the four difficult questions with one simple answer, is what I call the power failure question. It's based on a very simple but true principle. Look at any religion you want, and they all have different levels of commitment. Sold out, gung-ho, totally committed, all the way over on the spectrum to in name only. And this question is, I'm focusing on Christianity, why does faith in the resurrected, empowering Jesus generate such inconsistent results? I have a tweet up today that goes something like this. It says, on the showroom floor of the Christian faith, your evangelist will tell you that Jesus will change your life. But later, when you go to the faith service department for repairs, you will always be blamed for any malfunction. And I went through that in my life. It's like, well, okay, have you fasted for 7 days? Okay, try that. But are you really filled with the Spirit? I mean, it's a carrot on the stick. So the question is, if Jesus is who the Bible claims, he's still alive and he empowers you, why this range of how faith affects people, how much it changes or doesn't change them? Why, if you were traumatized as a child in a home with someone who had serious issues of some kind, why doesn't faith deal with that? And that's one of the things I saw in the groups. I saw people who've been going to church for 40 years and they've never talked about stuff and they were hurting. Some of them were ministers. And then one of my favorites is what I call the germ warfare question. It's simply, why didn't Jesus say anything about germs? He's called the great physician, and much ado is made about, well, he gave a blind man his sight. He healed a paralytic, and on and on and on. Well, yeah, there was a handful of people in one place a long time ago. But if he really was God, why didn't he just say, and he actually said, washing your hands doesn't matter. He said, that's like a ritual thing. Don't worry about the ritual. Wow. Well, I mean, why didn't you just say, hey, you know what? If you would wash your hands before you eat, not for religious, ritual, but to be clean. And your water, be careful what water you drink. I mean, simple answer, the one simple answer to all 4 questions, and I won't go into all 4 questions, is that nobody's there. It's not real. Christianity and all other religions are the creations of human minds, and there is no all-powerful, all-knowing, personal, loving God.
For someone that has been indoctrinated for so long into religion, that's a really heavy answer to hear, or even realization to have.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, if you get down to what's the hardest last thing to let go of, maybe the admission. And the way I say it about myself, some people say, well, you're just so arrogant. You're an atheist. You don't have a higher power. You think you're God, blah, blah, blah. And I say, no, when I was arrogant is when I said that the God of the universe had tapped me on the shoulder to be one of his spokespeople. And now I'm my brain and my body. And when I die, that's the end of me. I'm a speck in the universe. Now, that doesn't lead to nihilism and I'm not a cynic. I'm not a pessimist. And in How to Live a Meaningful Life, I'm sharing this is what matters to me. And I'm very careful to say, you've got to decide what matters to you, but this is what matters to me. Life is what you make of it. But I think for a lot of people, letting go of that idea, well, this life is, when I die, it's going to be even better. That's a hard one to let go of.
Well, I really do appreciate you coming on here and chatting with us. Just to start wrapping things up, did you have anything else that you'd like to add before we close for tonight?
Well, again, thanks for having me. I like this informal atmosphere. I may have rambled too much, and I apologize for that.
Not at all. And it was really nice to hear more about your background. And we so often see people on Twitter and we really don't know who's behind the accounts. And so it's actually really refreshing to hear the voice and the story behind everything. So really appreciate you coming out here and chatting with us. Hopefully this recorded. That's my one hope.
Yeah.
If it didn't record, we will have you back.
All right. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. And I'm glad to be able to share with you tonight.
Yeah, of course. Enjoy your evening, everyone. And hopefully you all will have a wonderful Friday. Good night, everyone.
Right. Good night. Thank you.
Hey, wife, I guess that's the end?
But husband, that's just sad.
It doesn't have to be. We are on lots of social media platforms like Twitter. Our handle there is sacrilegious_D.
For D's nuts.
Oh my God. Stop doing that. Anyway, we're also on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. There's a link to all of our social media sites at our website.
Ooh, we have a website?
Yeah, it's sacrilegiousdiscourse.com, where you can also find a link to our merch shop.
We have a merch shop?
Yep, we have podcast-themed clothing, mugs, notebooks, and more, as well as an atheist and science-themed products.
Wow, our fans should really go check that out right now.
Definitely. They can get in touch with us by sending an email to sacrilegiousdiscourse@gmail.com. But before they do that, we could really use some help.
Oh yeah? With what?
Well, it's not free running the podcast, and we need some financial support in order to get better equipment, which will free up time so we can concentrate on our podcast and our fans.
Okay, so what should they do?
Head over to patreon.com/sacrilegious discourse and sign up as a contributor on our podcast. Supporters there receive additional bi-weekly episodes that we record just for our Patreon members for as little as $2 a month.
Also, we'd really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe on whatever platform you're using.
And Apple Podcast reviews help us out tremendously.
Like and subscribe, leave an Apple review, join us on Twitter, support us on Patreon. That's a lot of instructions. Don't forget to say thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, bye.